They were just two silhouettes against the snow. A broken veteran and his loyal German shepherd seeking shelter from a storm that never seemed to end. But inside the house he inherited, buried beneath years of dust and lies, they would uncover a secret no bullet could silence. Under the falling snow, Ethan Cole stood firm before Maxwell Pierce, the polished businessman who came to buy what should never be owned. One spoke of money and progress, the other of legacy and truth buried beneath the frozen ground. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city below. And if you believe that some miracles wear scars and others wag their tails, hit subscribe. Because this story, born from loss and redeemed by grace, will live in your heart long after the snow has melted. The snow fell in wide, whispering veils over Portland, Maine, turning the empty streets into rivers of white silence. The wind carried the smell of salt and iron from the harbor, scraping across old roofs and echoing off the frozen windows of forgotten houses. Ethan Cole walked slowly through that quiet storm, a duffel bag slung across one shoulder, his boots sinking deep into the slush. At 38, Ethan looked older than his years, tall and broad-shouldered, with a lean, worn frame carved by years of military service and sleepless nights. His brown hair, shot through with early silver, hung messily around a face hardened by both discipline and grief. A faint scar crossed his right temple, a relic from his last tour in Afghanistan, and when he smiled, which was rare, it never quite reached his eyes. Those eyes were gray-green, clear yet burdened, like sea glass holding the memory of storms. Beside him padded Rex, his constant shadow, a 7-year-old German shepherd with thick black and tan fur and intelligent amber eyes. The dog's gait was sure and watchful, his ears pricked to every sound. Rex had served with Ethan overseas, trained to detect explosives and danger long before they came. The bond between them was deeper than companionship. It was survival forged in the crucible of fear and loss. Rex bore his own scars, a faint notch on one ear, a limp on cold mornings. But he moved with the quiet grace of something born for loyalty. Ethan stopped beneath a streetlight, snowflakes catching in his stubble. In his gloved hand, he held a letter, the paper worn soft from rereading. Whitfield and Associates law firm. The handwriting beneath was neat and formal. To Mr. Ethan Cole, you are the sole heir to the estate of Miss Eleanor Cole, deceased. Eleanor Cole, a name he didn't recognize. He had no living relatives, or so he'd always believed. His mother had died when he was 10, in a fire that consumed everything. Her bookstore, their home, their history. His father had vanished before that, leaving behind only unpaid bills and a boy who learned early that some people never come back. The army had given him a purpose for a while, a code to follow. But even that ended when the roadside explosion took half his unit and left Ethan with shrapnel in his shoulder and guilt in his heart. Since then, life had been a slow drift through cities and winters, with Rex as his only anchor. Now, against all logic, there was an inheritance. A mansion on the outskirts of Portland called Cole House. He had no expectations. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe some distant cousin mistook him for someone else. But a house was a roof, and the idea of not waking up in a shelter or his truck felt almost like grace. He arrived at the edge of town as daylight waned. The sky was a low bruise, heavy with more snow. The taxi driver, a young man with a Red Sox cap and nervous eyes, slowed when the forest thickened. "You sure this is the right address, sir?" he asked, peering through the windshield at the narrow drive barely visible through the drifts. Ethan compared the number on the old iron gate with the one on his letter. "Yeah, this is it." His voice was low, steady, the kind of tone that didn't invite conversation. The car rolled up the long, winding driveway. The trees pressed close on both sides, their bare branches scraping the roof like skeletal fingers. And then, through the haze of snow, the house emerged. A vast Victorian silhouette, its steep gables and broken shutters outlined by the dying light. The windows were dark, the paint peeled to bone, and ivy clung to the stone like veins of something still alive. Ethan stepped out into the snow. The air smelled of old wood and cold secrets. Rex sniffed the ground, tail raised, uneasy but curious. Up close, the front door was a massive slab of oak, its iron handle shaped like a lion's head. Ethan turned the old-fashioned key given by the lawyer. The lock groaned in protest, then yielded. Inside, a gust of stale air met them, the scent of dust, oil, and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. Ethan flicked on a flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. White sheets draped over furniture like ghosts mid-dance. A chandelier hung crooked, thick with cobwebs. He stepped across the marble floor, his boots echoing in the vastness. Rex trotted ahead, sniffing corners, nails clicking softly. The silence was so complete it felt sacred or haunted. "Home, sweet home," Ethan muttered. His voice sounded too loud, swallowed almost immediately by the emptiness. He explored room by room. The library smelled faintly of leather and time. The kitchen had cast iron pots still hanging, though everything else was layered in dust. Upstairs, the bedrooms were filled with relics of another century. Portraits of stern-looking ancestors, lace curtains yellowed with age. Yet amid the decay, the craftsmanship shone. Mahogany banisters, brass fittings, intricate wallpaper patterns beneath the peeling layers. Whoever Eleanor Cole had been, she had lived surrounded by quiet elegance. Ethan paused in what might have been the study, rubbing his shoulder. The injury always ached in the cold. He stared out the window at the endless white beyond. "Why me?" he murmured. Rex looked up from the rug, as if the dog too wondered what unseen thread had led them here. The sound came suddenly, a faint thump, like something shifting behind a wall. Rex's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Ethan froze. "Easy, boy." He followed Rex toward the sound. It came again, softer this time, but distinct. Near the far wall, the wallpaper bubbled slightly, as though hiding a wound. Ethan ran his hand along it. The paper was brittle, curling away from the plaster. Beneath his fingers, he felt a seam, a narrow gap that didn't belong. Rex pawed at the baseboard, nose pressed to the edge. "Chicos." "Good catch," Ethan said quietly. Using a pocket knife, he pried the wallpaper back, revealing a small wooden door no taller than his waist. It was nearly invisible, its handle tarnished with age. He hesitated. Years of training whispered caution, but curiosity, and something deeper, maybe the same instinct that made him survive all those years, urged him on. He turned the tiny latch. The door creaked open, exhaling a puff of air stale with age. Inside was darkness. He shone his light in. A narrow staircase descended into shadow. Dust motes swirled in the beam like disturbed spirits. Rex whined softly, ears flattened. Ethan stood there for a long moment, his breath visible in the cold. The rational part of him said to wait, to explore in daylight. But another part, the restless soldier who'd never stopped searching for meaning, stepped forward. "Stay close," he murmured. Together, man and dog descended the narrow steps, unaware that behind those walls waited the first clue to a story buried for half a century, and that this lonely winter house would soon reveal a legacy soaked in secrets, loss, and the quiet resilience of those who refused to be forgotten. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of coastal winter dawn that carried both silence and unease. A low fog rolled in from the Atlantic, wrapping the old house in ghostly stillness. Ethan awoke to the creak of wood and the faint hum of wind through the eaves. Rex was already up, sitting alert by the frosted window, his breath fogging the glass. The night's discovery still lingered in Ethan's mind. The hidden door, the stairs descending into darkness. But exhaustion had overtaken curiosity, and he'd sealed the small door again, deciding to face whatever waited below when the sun returned. Now, in the pale light, the house looked almost alive. Dust motes floated like snowflakes through the cold air, and faint footprints, his and Rex's, traced a path across the marble floor. The faint smell of brewed coffee drifted from the kitchen, impossible yet real. He reached for his jacket and followed it. In the kitchen stood a woman, older, straight-backed, wearing a thick gray wool coat over a long navy skirt. Her hair, once black, was now streaked silver, neatly pinned in a bun. Her skin bore the pale translucence of someone who'd lived most of her years near the sea, and her eyes, a sharp blue-gray, held a kind of quiet authority that made Ethan pause. She turned, unstartled by his presence. "You must be Mr. Cole," she said. Her voice was crisp but not unkind, shaped by habit and control. "I didn't expect you quite so early." Ethan blinked. "You're—" "Margaret Winters," she supplied before he could finish. "Caretaker of this house for the past 40 years. Miss Eleanor left instructions that I was to continue until the estate settled." He studied her more closely. Her posture was immaculate, but the slight tremor in her hands as she poured coffee betrayed age, maybe 75 or more. There was a composure in her manner, the kind he'd seen in officers who'd lived through too many wars without ever leaving home. "I didn't know anyone else had keys," Ethan said. "I keep the grounds, manage supplies, and see to what remains of the estate's upkeep. Miss Eleanor was particular about her privacy, but she trusted me." Mrs. Winters slid a mug across the counter. "You look like you could use this." Ethan accepted it, the warmth bleeding into his fingers. "She was my aunt?" "Your great-aunt, technically," the woman corrected, glancing toward the window where Rex sat watching. "And that must be your companion." "Rex," Ethan said. The dog's ears twitched at his name. "He doesn't trust easily." "A good quality," Mrs. Winters replied, her lips curving faintly. "Dogs see truths people prefer to ignore." The wind rattled the panes, and somewhere in the house a door groaned. Ethan took a sip of the bitter coffee, studying her expression. "You knew her well? Eleanor Cole?" Mrs. Winters's eyes softened with something between affection and regret. "I worked here since I was 17. I knew her better than most, though I'd never claimed to have understood her. She kept her own counsel." "What was she like?" The older woman's gaze wandered across the kitchen, the chipped porcelain, the faded wallpaper, the way frost crept through the corners of the glass. Brilliant, private, sometimes cruel in her kindness. She believed secrets were necessary armor in this world. Ethan frowned. Armor against what? Mrs. Winters met his eyes, and for the first time, there was a shadow of hesitation. Against her own family. Before he could press further, Rex let out a low bark from the hall. Ethan followed the sound, the old caretaker close behind. The dog stood at the threshold of the foyer, fur bristling, nose pressed toward the wall-papered wall, the very spot that hid the small door. Mrs. Winters's face paled slightly when she saw it. "You found the passage. You knew about it?" "I knew it existed," she said quietly. "Miss Eleanor forbade anyone from opening it after her brother's death." Ethan ran a hand along the seam of the wallpaper, the memory of last night vivid again. "What was down there?" Mrs. Winters hesitated. "It was once her study. After the fire, after she lost her niece, she sealed it off. Said some rooms are better left to memory." "Her niece?" Ethan turned sharply. "You mean my mother?" For a long time, the only sound was the ticking of an unseen clock. Then the older woman nodded slowly. "Yes, Laura. She was very much like you. Defiant. Thought she could outrun her family's ghosts." Ethan's grip on the flashlight tightened. "She died in a fire. I was there." Mrs. Winters's expression softened. "I know. Miss Eleanor spoke of it often. She blamed herself. Said the curse of the Cole name never spared the brave ones." He looked at her sharply. "Curse?" "It's a figure of speech," she said quickly, though her eyes betrayed something deeper. "Miss Eleanor had her beliefs. She said the house carried the weight of what it witnessed, that some truths, once buried, start to rot and poison the soil." Ethan exhaled slowly. "You talk like you believe her." Mrs. Winters drew her coat tighter. "Belief is irrelevant. I've lived long enough to know every family hides its share of graves. The Coles simply built theirs into the walls." The silence stretched. Then she straightened, regaining her composure. "I'll prepare the master bedroom for you. The plumbing still works, though the pipes complain. I'll return tomorrow with groceries and fresh linens." Ethan nodded, unsure what to say. "Thank you." As she gathered her gloves and scarf, her movements were deliberate, each gesture steeped in routine. Near the door, she paused. "Mr. Cole," she said, turning back. "Whatever you find in this house, remember. Curiosity is a gift, but not all gifts come without a price." The door shut softly behind her, and the sound of her footsteps faded into the snow. Ethan stood in the silence, staring after her. Then he crouched beside Rex, scratching the dog's neck absently. "She knows more than she's saying." Rex gave a small whine of agreement. When night fell again, the storm thickened. Ethan sat by the fireplace, the faint orange light flickering across his face. He turned the old photograph he'd found in his pocket, something he hadn't noticed until unpacking his duffel. It must have fallen from one of the drawers upstairs, hidden among brittle papers. The image showed a woman in her 20s, standing in front of a 1960s convertible, her smile vivid, her hair catching sunlight. She wore a sleeveless dress with a floral pattern, and though the photograph was faded, her eyes shone clear and familiar. Ethan's chest tightened. The curve of her cheek, the tilt of her head, it was his mother's face, or his own, reflected across time. He flipped the photo over. On the back, written in ink faded to sepia, Laura Cole, summer 1965. Rex rested his head on Ethan's knee, sensing the shift in his heartbeat. The soldier stared into the fire, the warmth doing nothing to ease the cold settling in his bones. His mother had been here. His aunt had sealed this house after losing her. And now, 40 years later, he had returned. The last of the Cole line. Perhaps the only one capable of uncovering what really happened. Outside, snow buried the footprints of the morning. Inside, the fire cracked softly, the only living sound. As the flames dimmed, Ethan whispered into the stillness. "We're not leaving, Rex. Not until we know the truth. Tom tat tieng viet. Sang hom sao. Ethan gap ba Margaret Winters. Ngoi trong koi biet tu hon bon moi nam. Bakeve Eleanor Cole. Ngoi di kwa ko. Mod funu thong min. Bian va jai ton tuong. Ki rex fat hien lai kan kua an. Ba Winters hoang so. Noi rang jo tung la fong lam viet sua Eleanor. Noi bat jean fong tua sao kai chet kua chao gai. Laura Cole, mi kua Ethan. Truok hi roeji. Ba chije lai loi chan bao lan lung. Kia jin kole luon chon hung jiu kan juoch chon giao. The storm arrived before dawn, a furious white curtain sweeping in from the Atlantic and swallowing the coast. The wind howled through the chimneys of the coal house, rattling loose shutters like the bones of some restless giant. Inside, the temperature had dropped enough for Ethan's breath to fog as he moved from room to room with Rex close behind, their shadows stretching across the faded wallpaper. It had been 3 days since Mrs. Winters's warning. 3 nights of uneasy sleep punctuated by dreams of fire, of his mother's face blurred by smoke. Ethan had taken to restoring the house out of restlessness, perhaps even guilt. There was comfort in the rhythm of labor, the scrape of broom against floor, the creak of old hinges revived by oil. He stripped away sheets that had covered the furniture for decades, revealing what once had been beauty. Carved wood, hand-woven rugs, silver frames dulled with tarnish. The process was quiet work, but it gave shape to his thoughts. Rex followed him faithfully, tail brushing the floor, ears flicking toward every strange sound. The dog had grown more alert lately, pacing the hall at night, pausing often to stare toward the walled-off study. Ethan noticed, but didn't stop him. Some instincts, he'd learned, deserved respect. By midday, the wind had eased to a low moan. Ethan decided to clear the west parlor, a smaller room adjacent to the sealed study. As he pried loose a cracked panel of wood, the tip of his crowbar struck something hollow. He froze, tapping again. The sound came back, empty, almost deliberate. Rex whined softly, pawing at the spot. Ethan knelt and brushed away the dust. Beneath the panel, hidden between 2 support beams, was a narrow cavity. He reached in and pulled out a small wooden box, about the size of a loaf of bread. Its surface was darkened by time, carved with an intricate pattern of ivy leaves. The latch, green with corrosion, snapped easily under his knife. Inside, wrapped in brittle linen, lay a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon faded almost to gray. The air that escaped smelled faintly of lavender and smoke, a scent that stirred something deep in his memory. He sat back on the floorboards, the cold forgotten, and unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, unmistakably from another era. "My dearest Laura," it began, "every day without you feels like a wound that refuses to close." Ethan's throat tightened. His mother's name. He read on, line after trembling line. The writer was Thomas Pierce, a man who described stolen meetings, long drives by the sea, whispered plans of escape. His tone was both passionate and fearful, as if aware their love was a fragile rebellion. "Your uncle would never forgive us," one letter said. "But I can't live in his shadow any longer. You deserve light, not chains." Ethan's hands shook slightly as he turned each page. The next few letters detailed the growing tension. Pierce's work with the Cole family, business, the conflict with Eleanor's brother over land rights, and something about a discovery that could change everything. The final letters grew frantic. "They know, Laura. Your uncle knows. He's been watching. I fear I've put you in danger." The last letter was dated only days before the fire that had taken his mother's life. If anything happens to me, promise you'll protect our child. There's more buried beneath that house than gold. It's the reason for everything. Ethan sat there for a long time, the storm hammering against the windows, his pulse thundering in his ears. Rex pressed close, resting his head on Ethan's knee. The soldier stared at the stack of letters spread before him, like ghosts demanding recognition. His father, Thomas Pierce, a name tied to his family's ruin. He rose slowly, crossing to the small desk by the window. There were other artifacts scattered there. Ledgers, a half-broken pocket watch, a small crystal paperweight. He picked up the watch, turning it over. The initials TP were engraved on the back. His breath caught. Pieces began to click together with terrible clarity. The sealed study, the photograph of his mother, the way Mrs. Winters had hesitated when speaking about the family. His mother hadn't simply died in a tragic fire. She'd been silenced, and his father, eliminated before he could expose the truth. Ethan ran his hand through his hair, pacing. The letters mentioned a discovery, buried beneath the land. He remembered the lawyer's words about Eleanor refusing to sell the property. What if this inheritance wasn't just about guilt or family obligation? What if Eleanor had wanted him to finish what his parents started? He returned to the hidden compartment and searched again, running his fingers along the edges. Something thin scraped his knuckles, a piece of folded paper wedged into the corner. He pulled it free carefully. It was a rough sketch of the estate grounds, drawn in graphite marked with strange notations. Near the western boundary, a circle had been drawn and labeled simply, Mine Shaft Entrance, sealed 1964. Jesus, he whispered. Rex tilted his head, ears twitching. Ethan spread the map across the floor, his eyes scanning the details. The shaft lay beneath the forest ridge less than half a mile from the house. If the letters were true, his parents had uncovered something valuable enough to kill for, something that the Cole family had tried to keep buried. A sudden knock startled him. He shoved the letters back into the box and stood quickly. Through the frosted glass of the front door, he saw a figure, tall, male, wrapped in a heavy coat. The visitor removed his hat as the door opened, revealing a weathered face with lines etched deep by salt air and hard living. He looked to be in his late 50s, clean-shaven except for a short gray mustache. "Afternoon," the man said, his voice carrying the rasp of someone who'd smoked too many. Winters. "Name's Henry Dalton. I run the hardware store down in town. Mrs. Winters told me you'd moved in. Said you might need supplies." Ethan studied him a moment, noting the cautious friendliness in his eyes. Hazel, sharp despite age. Henry had the air of someone who'd seen too much and talked too little. The kind of man small towns relied on, but never truly knew. "Appreciate it," Ethan replied. "Storm's got me working more than resting." Henry chuckled. "That house'll do that to you. Been standing here near a century and a half. Some say it's got a memory of its own." Ethan managed a faint smile. "I'm starting to believe that." They spoke briefly about tools, insulation, and fuel deliveries. But when Henry mentioned the Cole family name, his tone changed. "Your aunt, she was a fine lady, kept to herself. Shame how it all ended." Ethan frowned. "Ended?" Henry shifted uneasily. "After your mother's death, Miss Eleanor stopped letting anyone near the West Woods. Said the land wasn't safe. But the old-timers still talk. Miners used to work out there, long before permits. Found something strange in the rock, back in the 60s. Then the whole operation vanished overnight." He rubbed his gloved hands together, eyes distant. You ask me, there's stories buried deeper than that mine. When the man finally left, the house seemed colder. Ethan returned to the parlor, staring once more at the letters, the map, the initials on the pocket watch. The truth, whatever it was, had been hidden in plain sight all these years, preserved in walls and whispers. He reached down, scratching Rex behind the ear. Looks like we've got work to do, partner. The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the storm was dying, but the world it revealed was whiter, emptier, and far more dangerous than before. Night came early that day, swallowed by a storm that erased every sound and shape outside. The wind howled through the trees, bending branches until they cracked like gunfire. Snow swirled beneath the street lamps, each flake turning silver before vanishing into the dark. Inside the coal house, Ethan sat near the dying fire. The letters and map from the day before spread across the table like evidence at a trial. Rex lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, but his ears twitched at every groan of timber and whisper of wind. Ethan's mind raced. The name Pierce repeated like a drumbeat. His father, Thomas Pierce, had loved his mother and died for it. Now there was another Pierce alive. Maxwell. He'd looked up the name on an old town ledger Mrs. Winters had left in a desk drawer. Maxwell Pierce, industrial developer, CEO of Pierce Holdings, specializing in land acquisitions and energy extraction. Ethan stared at the record until the letters blurred. The bloodline that destroyed his family still thrived, feeding on the same greed. A car engine broke the storm's rhythm. Headlights swept across the frosted windows. Rex sprang up, barking sharply, tail rigid. Ethan rose, reaching for the old revolver that hung near the fireplace, a keepsake from his military days. Through the lace curtains, he saw a black SUV idling in the snow. 3 figures stepped out, their silhouettes tall against the wind. One walked ahead, coat billowing like a cloak. Moments later, a firm knock echoed through the hall. Ethan opened the door halfway. The man standing outside removed his hat, revealing neatly combed dark hair streaked with silver. He looked around, 45, tall, broad-shouldered, his posture precise, like someone accustomed to commanding rooms. His face was angular, clean-shaven, and his eyes were a piercing ice blue, calm, analytical, and disturbingly confident. "Mr. Cole," the man greeted smoothly. "My apologies for arriving unannounced. I'm Maxwell Pierce. My father knew your family well." Ethan's jaw tightened. Did he? Maxwell's smile was polished, the kind that belonged to politicians and predators. "Thomas Pierce, my late father. He used to speak of the Coles with admiration. I thought it fitting to visit when I heard the estate had finally changed hands." Behind him stood 2 men, bodyguards by the look of them. One was tall and lean, his shaved head glinting under the porch light. The other, heavier, kept his gloved hands inside his coat. Their silence spoke louder than introductions. Ethan kept the door partly closed. "If this is about the land, I'm not selling." "Selling?" Maxwell chuckled softly, as if amused by the very suggestion. "Mr. Cole, you misunderstand. I'm here to offer you freedom. That house is a mausoleum. The land is worth millions. There are development rights, mineral veins, geothermal potential. You could start over anywhere." Ethan's voice was calm, but it carried steel. Start over's not something men like me do easily, especially when the past won't stay buried. For the first time, Maxwell's composure faltered slightly. "So you've read them then? The letters?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You know about them." Maxwell stepped forward, the storm swirling around his shoulders. "You think your parents were heroes, Mr. Cole? My father tried to protect them. He warned your mother to leave before it was too late. Eleanor Cole made sure no one ever found the truth beneath this ground. She hid it from both our families." "Your father lied," Ethan said coldly, "and people died for it." Maxwell sighed, as though speaking to a stubborn child. "I see this won't be a friendly conversation. I'll give you time to reconsider." He placed a card on the doorframe. "Pierce Holdings, Executive Office, Portland. You can reach me when the house starts feeling too heavy." He turned and walked back through the snow, his guards following silently. The SUV disappeared down the long drive, its taillights fading into the blizzard. Ethan locked the door, heart still pounding. He fed another log into the fire, but the flames refused to grow. Something about the man's confidence unsettled him deeply. He'd come prepared, almost rehearsed, as if he already knew everything Ethan had discovered. Rex growled low near the window, staring out into the dark. Ethan followed his gaze but saw only snow. Still, the sense of being watched lingered. Hours later, the storm deepened. Ethan was upstairs sorting through a box of Eleanor's journals when Rex barked again, louder this time, frantic. Ethan dropped the book and sprinted down. The front door rattled violently. Glass shattered somewhere in the back of the house. He grabbed the revolver and a flashlight. "Rex, stay close." They moved silently down the corridor. The beam caught footprints melting into the carpet, wet snow and mud. Someone was inside. Rex stiffened, hackles raised. A shadow darted past the doorway, the gleam of metal in hand. "Stop right there!" Ethan shouted, flashlight fixed on the movement. The intruder bolted toward the kitchen. Rex lunged, teeth flashing. The man swung a crowbar, but Rex's weight knocked him sideways into the counter. The second intruder appeared from the hall, masked, shouting something indistinct over the storm. Ethan fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The noise echoed through the house like thunder. "Get out!" he roared. The men scrambled, one dragging the other to the broken window. They vanished into the white chaos outside. Rex stood panting, fur bristling, a shallow cut across his shoulder. Ethan dropped to his knees, checking him quickly. No deep wounds. "Good boy," he whispered, voice shaking with adrenaline. When the quiet finally returned, Ethan followed the trail of wet footprints. They led to the cellar door, slightly ajar. He descended carefully, the flashlight beam bouncing over stone walls and old crates. The basement was colder than before, the air damp and metallic. At the far corner, behind a row of rusted shelves, something glimmered. He pushed aside the debris and uncovered a steel safe embedded in the wall, half covered by concrete. The initials EC were engraved faintly on the door. It looked untouched for decades. He ran his hand across it, then found a loose brick nearby. Inside the hollow behind it, an envelope. The paper had yellowed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor Cole. Ethan tore it open. Inside was a single page. "To whoever bears my name and conscience, know that this land must never be mined. Beneath it lies not fortune, but a grave. The truth cost too many lives already. I entrust you to guard it, not exploit it." Tucked behind the letter was a folded will. The language was legal but clear. All mineral rights beneath Cole Estate are to remain sealed and unclaimed for 100 years following this document's date. And at the bottom, written in ink darker than the rest, "Thomas Pierce is not who he claimed to be." Ethan felt the world tilt slightly. The flames upstairs flickered through the cracks in the floorboards, casting ghostly shadows on the cellar walls. He tucked the letter into his jacket, heart hammering, mind racing. Somewhere outside, an engine started. The SUV. They hadn't gone far. He stood in the half-light, gripping the revolver, Rex beside him, the storm closing in again. For the first time, Ethan realized he wasn't just the heir to a house. He was the last guardian of its truth, and the enemies who'd buried it were no longer ghosts. They were coming back. The storm had passed, leaving Portland washed in silence and light. The sun rose pale and distant, glinting off rooftops and the glassy surface of the frozen harbor. The coal house, once wrapped in darkness, stood beneath a veil of melting frost, its long icicles dripping in rhythm with the morning. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug, staring at the documents spread before him. The will, the letter, the photographs. Rex rested beside his chair, eyes half closed, but his tail twitched whenever the floorboards creaked. The night's chaos had left both man and dog drained, but alive. A knock at the door came around noon. 3 measured taps. Ethan rose, revolver still within reach, and opened the door to reveal Detective James Holloway, a man in his mid-50s with a weathered face and steady eyes. Holloway's build was lean, his posture still military straight, despite the trench coat draped over his shoulders. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short, and a faint scar along his jawline gave him the air of a man who'd seen more violence than he spoke of. "Mr. Cole," he said, flashing a badge. "Portland PD, we received your call." Ethan nodded, stepping aside. "Come in. Everything's in here." The detective moved with quiet precision, his boots leaving melting prints on the floor. Rex sniffed him once, decided he was no threat, and settled again by the fire. "Nice dog," Holloway murmured. "Best damn soldier I ever had," Ethan replied. Holloway sat, flipping open his notebook. "You said there was a break-in? And something about documents?" Ethan slid the folder across the table. "Not just documents. Proof." He explained everything. Maxwell's visit, the threats, the safe in the cellar, the will forbidding excavation, and Eleanor's warning. Holloway listened without interruption, his pen moving occasionally, his expression unreadable. When Ethan finished, the detective leaned back. "I'll need to verify these," Holloway said. "But if what you're saying holds up, this could open an investigation a lot bigger than a trespassing charge. Pierce Holdings has been under quiet scrutiny for years. There have been whispers about land deals, missing contractors. Nothing solid. Until now." Ethan rubbed his temple. "He's not going to stop, is he?" "Men like Pierce never stop until someone forces them to," Holloway said. His tone carried the weight of experience. "You've got courage, Cole. Most people would have sold and run." "I've been running long enough," Ethan replied quietly. "It's time something good came from this family name." By late afternoon, 2 squad cars arrived. Officers combed the property, photographing footprints, broken glass, and the safe. The contents of Eleanor's letters were cataloged as evidence. Holloway promised to deliver them to the state prosecutor by morning. As the cars pulled away, the sound of sirens faded into the cold horizon. Over the next week, news spread fast. The Portland Herald ran the headline, "Local developer under investigation for fraud and attempted homicide." Maxwell Pierce's public denial only deepened suspicion. Anonymous sources leaked financial records showing illegal drilling permits and hush payments dating back decades. The mining project was shut down, and federal agents took over the case. But for Ethan, justice came quietly. He never went to the hearings. He didn't need to. The snow-covered land behind the house was safe again. No drills, no machines, only silence and the sound of wind through pine. Rex healed quickly, his shoulder scab fading beneath thick fur. They began repairing the house together, room by room, as though reclaiming its soul. It was during one of those mornings that Clara Jennings, a woman from the Portland Veterans Outreach Office, arrived. She was in her early 40s, with auburn hair tied back loosely, freckles across pale skin, and eyes that carried a calm intelligence. Dressed in a wool coat and leather gloves, she had the brisk confidence of someone used to working in chaos and bringing order to it. "I heard about what happened," she said, shaking Ethan's hand. "You were Army, right? 101st Airborne?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Word travels fast." "Small town?" she smiled. "We're setting up winter shelters for vets, food, therapy, maybe job placement. Mrs. Winters said you might have space out here." Ethan looked around at the large, empty hallways, the old portraits staring down. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Maybe it's time this house started doing something good again." Over the next month, Ethan used part of his inheritance to renovate the estate. The barn was cleaned out, refitted with heaters and kennels. Rex oversaw every corner like a four-legged supervisor. Volunteers, veterans, carpenters, and even kids from town came to help. They laughed, swore, built, and shared stories over coffee that steamed in the winter air. The property slowly transformed from a haunted relic into a place of purpose. When the sign was finally hung, it read, "Cole Veterans Sanctuary, a home for soldiers and strays." The opening day drew a small crowd. Holloway came in his off-duty jacket, shaking Ethan's hand with quiet pride. Mrs. Winters stood near the porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl, smiling faintly, a ghost of her former reserve melting in the sunlight. Clara organized the volunteers while Rex trotted between them, tail high, basking in every pat and laugh. Later, as the guests departed and twilight settled, Ethan walked down to the frozen lake behind the house. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, the kind of light that makes even broken things look whole. Rex followed, leaving deep paw prints beside his boots. Ethan stopped at the edge of the ice. The reflection of the house shimmered on the surface, rebuilt, reborn. He thought of his mother, of Eleanor, of the lives lost to greed and secrets. For the first time in years, he felt something lighter than duty. Peace. Rex sat beside him, pressing his shoulder gently against Ethan's leg. The veteran smiled, voice barely above a whisper. "We're finally home, buddy," he said, just like she wanted. Rex's ears flicked, and his tail thumped once against the snow. Behind them, the warm glow of the house spread through the windows like the beating heart of something alive again. In the quiet after every storm, there's always a whisper, soft, steady, like a prayer carried through the wind. Ethan once believed war had taken everything from him, his peace, his faith, even the meaning of home. Yet when the world turned white and silent, he found that the miracle he'd been searching for wasn't buried in gold or hidden beneath the earth. It was in forgiveness. The Cole house stood not as a monument to loss, but as a promise renewed. Every wounded soul that crossed its threshold, every abandoned dog that found warmth by its hearth, became proof that redemption is real. Because sometimes, God's miracles don't arrive in lightning or thunder. They come in quiet moments. A loyal companion's eyes, a stranger's kindness, the courage to rebuild what was broken. And maybe that's the message for all of us. When life feels buried under its own snow, grief, doubt, exhaustion, remember, the thaw always comes. God still works through ordinary people, turning pain into purpose, loneliness into sanctuary, and endings into new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Tell someone who needs hope that miracles still happen. Comment where you're watching from, because every story, like every snowflake, carries its own design. Subscribe for more stories of faith, redemption, and the bond between man and the loyal hearts God places beside us.